"Your father never died," the girl said to the millionaire, standing before the old photograph. Then she shows him a secret address, and when they arrive, they discover something shocking. Comment giving a rating from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The construction siren blared through downtown Bridgeport as Arthur Quintanilla parked his black Cadillac in front of the construction site. At 52, he had become the type of man who checked his watch 3 times before leaving the car, adjusted his tie even when it was already perfect, and inspected every detail of his ventures as if his life depended on it. In fact, it did. The apartment building rising before him represented more than concrete and steel. It was another victory against the poverty that had devastated his childhood. Each brick laid was a defiant gesture against that terrible morning 40 years ago when he learned that his father, Bartholomew, had passed away forever in a work accident, leaving the family with nothing but debts and tears. "Good morning, Mr. Quintanilla," greeted John, the engineer in charge of the project. "The finishes on the 10th floor are ready for your assessment." Arthur nodded curtly. Unnecessary conversations irritated him. Since building his real estate empire, he had learned that efficiency and emotional detachment were his best tools. Even at home, with Isabella and the kids, he maintained that same controlled demeanor that protected him from any vulnerability. He was walking toward the entrance of the construction site when something caught his attention. A small figure was sitting on the sidewalk, leaning against the construction site's barrier. It was a girl, no older than 4, with dirty clothes and disheveled hair. She held something against her chest with both small hands. Arthur stopped. Street children were not uncommon in the downtown area, but something about this girl bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was her posture. She wasn't begging or crying. She was just watching people pass by, with a seriousness strange for someone so young. "Sir, should I call someone to remove the girl from here?" asked John, noticing his boss's attention. "No," replied Arthur, surprised by his own answer. "Leave her." The girl raised her eyes and stared directly at him. Her eyes were large and dark, filled with a sadness that Arthur recognized, although he didn't know from where. She stood up slowly and walked towards him, still holding the mysterious object against her chest. "Mister," she said in a small but firm voice, "you look like someone I know." Arthur felt a tightening in his stomach. There was something familiar about this child, something that reminded him of himself when he was the same age, lost, scared, carrying a weight too great for small shoulders. "What's your name?" he asked, crouching down to her level. "Catherine," the girl replied. "And you're Arthur, aren't you?" The world stopped. Arthur felt his blood run cold. How could an unknown child know his name? He observed her more closely, looking for any clue that would explain this impossible situation. "How do you know my name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Catherine extended the object she was holding, an old yellowed photograph with edges worn by time. "Because he told me about you. Every day he talks about Arthur." With trembling hands, Arthur took the photo. What he saw made him stumble backward. In the faded image, 2 young men smiled at the camera. One of them he recognized immediately, even after 40 years. It was his father, Bartholomew Quintanilla, with the same kind eyes and warm smile that Arthur held in his memory. The other man was unknown, but there was something familiar in his features. "Where did you get this?" Arthur whispered, his voice choked. "Grandma Dorothy gave it to me," Catherine replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "She said that when I found the man who looks like this one in the photo, I had to give this to him." Arthur looked again at the photograph, then at the girl. His rational mind tried to find a logical explanation for this situation, but his heart raced with a possibility he dared not consider. "Catherine," he said, trying to control his breathing, "who is this Grandma Dorothy?" "She's the one who takes care of me," the girl replied, "and Grandpa, too. He gets confused sometimes, but when he plays the piano, he remembers everything, especially you. The world began to spin around Arthur. Piano, his father played the piano. It had been one of the few good memories of his childhood. Bartholomew sitting at the old piano in the living room, playing songs that made his mother smile. "Catherine," he said, his voice almost inaudible. "This grandpa, what's his name?" The girl looked at him with those large, serious eyes. "Bartholomew, but he forgets his name sometimes. Grandma Dorothy said you would know who he is when you saw me." Arthur's legs failed him. He leaned against the construction site wall, the photo trembling in his hands. 40 years. 40 years of pain, of building an entire life on the certainty that his father had passed away forever. And now a 4-year-old child appeared with an impossible photo and words that destroyed the entire reality he knew. "Where is he?" he asked, barely able to form the words. "At Grandma Dorothy's house in the South End," Catherine replied. "He's always looking out the window like he's waiting for someone. Grandma says he's waiting for you." Arthur closed his eyes, trying to process the impossible. His father was alive. After 4 decades, after building an entire life on the pain of loss, Bartholomew was alive and waiting for him. When he opened his eyes again, Catherine was watching him with an expression that mixed hope and anxiety. "Are you going to see him?" she asked, extending her little hand to touch Arthur's arm. Arthur looked at the photo one more time, then at that child who had appeared out of nowhere to destroy and rebuild his world in the same instant. His mind was at war. The rational part screamed that this was impossible, but his heart whispered that he had finally found the answer to a void he had carried for decades. "Yes," he said, putting the photo in his coat pocket. "I am." The drive to the South End had never seemed so long. Arthur drove in silence, with Catherine in the passenger seat, her small legs swinging in the air. The girl had insisted on accompanying him, saying that Grandma Dorothy would be worried if she didn't come home. "It's that blue house," Catherine said, pointing to a simple building at the end of the street. "Grandma always leaves the porch light on for when he gets confused and doesn't remember where he lives." Arthur parked the car and remained motionless for a few moments, observing the house. It was humble, with peeling paint and a small garden in front. Nothing to indicate the presence of the man he had mourned for 40 years. His right hand gripped the photo in his pocket, as if it were a lucky charm. "Grandma!" Catherine shouted, running towards the door. "I brought Arthur." A woman appeared in the doorway. Dorothy was 78 years old, with white hair tied in a loose bun and eyes that carried decades of stories. When she saw Arthur, her expression changed completely. Surprise, relief, and something akin to guilt mixed on her wrinkled face. "So you're Arthur," she said, drying her hands on her apron. 40 years. 40 years waiting for this moment." "Mrs. Dorothy," Arthur began, his voice tense. "Catherine told me that my father is here, but that's impossible. Bartholomew Quintanilla passed away 40 years ago in a work accident." Dorothy sighed deeply and motioned for him to come in. The house was simple but cozy, with old furniture and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. From somewhere inside the house came the soft sound of a piano being played. "Sit down, son," Dorothy said, indicating a worn armchair. "What I'm about to tell you will change everything you believe you know." Arthur sat on the edge of the armchair, unable to relax. The sound of the piano continued, a melancholic melody that he knew but couldn't identify. "Your father didn't pass away in that accident," Dorothy began, her hands trembling slightly. "He was seriously injured, yes. He was taken to St. John's Hospital, where I worked as head nurse. He had head injuries, multiple fractures. The doctors said he wouldn't survive." Arthur's breathing became irregular. "But we looked for him. My mother looked in all the hospitals. He was in a coma for 3 months," Dorothy continued. "When he woke up, he didn't remember anything, not even his own name. There were no documents with him, and since no one looked for him at our hospital—" She paused, avoiding Arthur's gaze. I became attached to him during his recovery. He was a kind man, even without memory. And when he was discharged, I offered my home so that he could fully recover. Why didn't you ever look for his family? Arthur asked, his voice full of emotion. Dorothy lowered her eyes. In the beginning, we tried, but he was afraid. He said that if no one had looked for him, maybe it would be better to start a new life. And I was a lonely woman. My husband had passed away 5 years earlier, and I had no children. Bartholomew brought life to this empty house. The sound of the piano stopped abruptly. Slow footsteps approached the living room, and Arthur felt his heart race. A man appeared in the doorway, older, hair completely white, thinner than Arthur remembered, but unmistakably Bartholomew Quintanilla. "Dorothy," the man said, his voice still familiar after so many years. "Who is this man?" Arthur stood up slowly, tears blurring his vision. "Dad, it's me." "Arthur?" Bartholomew observed him for a long moment, his eyes carrying deep confusion. "Arthur," he repeated the name as if he were testing the word. "That name. I dream about that name." "He remembers fragments," Dorothy explained quickly. "Some days are better than others. Music helps him access old memories." Arthur took a step forward, but Bartholomew recoiled instinctively. "No, don't come close. I don't know you." The pain that shot through Arthur's chest was physical. 40 years dreaming of this reunion, and his father didn't recognize him. Worse, he was afraid of him. "Dad," Arthur whispered, his hands trembling, "it's your son. You used to teach me how to play the piano. Remember the song you always played? The one that made Mom smile?" Bartholomew made a face of pain, bringing his hands to his head. "Piano. Yes, I play the piano, but I don't remember. I can't remember faces." Catherine, who had been quiet until then, approached Bartholomew and took his hand. "Grandpa, this is the Arthur you always talk about, the boy you taught how to play the piano." "Boy?" Bartholomew looked at Arthur again. "But this is a man." "People grow up, Grandpa," Catherine said with her childish wisdom. "You've been gone for a long time." At that moment, Arthur's cell phone rang. It was Isabella. He hesitated, but answered. "Arthur, where are you?" His wife's voice sounded irritated. "Rodrigo has a presentation at school today, and you promised you'd be there." Arthur looked at his father, who continued to observe him with that confused expression, then at Dorothy and Catherine. Something came up at work. An urgent problem. Something always comes up when it's about family," Isabella replied. "This needs to stop, Arthur. The boys need their father." He hung up the phone, torn between two worlds, the family he had built over the last 20 years and the father he had just rediscovered. Bartholomew had returned to the piano and started playing again, the same melancholic melody as before. "He plays that song every day," Dorothy said, "especially when he's anxious or confused. It's as if it's the only thing that calms him down." Arthur approached the piano carefully. The music was familiar, but he couldn't remember where he knew it from. When he was a few feet away from his father, Bartholomew stopped playing and looked at him. "You have sad eyes," Bartholomew said, his voice softer. "Like mine." "Why are you sad?" "Because I lost someone very important a long time ago," Arthur replied, struggling to control his emotion. "And now that I've found him, he doesn't recognize me." Bartholomew nodded slowly. "I lost someone too. A boy. I dream about him sometimes. He laughed a lot and liked it when I played the piano, his eyes filled with tears, but I can't remember his face." Arthur knelt beside the piano bench. "Dad, that boy is me. I grew up, I got old, but I'm still your son." For a moment, something shone in Bartholomew's eyes. He raised his hand slowly and touched Arthur's face. "Arthur," he whispered. "My boy." But the moment lasted only a few seconds. Bartholomew's expression became confused again, and he withdrew his hand. "No, I can't remember. It hurts when I try to remember." Dorothy approached and put her hand on Arthur's shoulder. The doctors said that forcing memories can be harmful. They come back little by little, but it takes time. Arthur stood up, emotionally shattered. He had waited 40 years for this moment, imagined 1,000 times what it would be like to meet his father again. He never imagined it would be like this, painful, confusing, filled with a distance that seemed insurmountable. "I need to go," he said, his voice hoarse. "My family is waiting for me." "Are you coming back?" Catherine asked, her big eyes full of hope. Arthur looked at his father, who had returned to the piano and started playing as if nothing had happened. I don't know." He left the house carrying a different weight than when he had entered. The certainty that his father was alive was mixed with the pain of realizing that the man he had rediscovered was, in many ways, a stranger. And now he needed to go home and pretend that nothing had changed, when in reality his entire world had been turned upside down. Arthur arrived home 3 hours late for Rodrigo's presentation. He found Isabella in the kitchen, washing the dishes with jerky movements that betrayed her irritation. She didn't even turn around when she heard the door close. "The presentation was beautiful," she said, her voice sharp. "Rodrigo played the guitar and sang that song you said you hated. Too bad you missed it." "I'm sorry, Isabella. There was a complication at the construction site and—" "There always is," she interrupted him, finally turning around. Her eyes were red. "There's always something more important than your family." Arthur approached, but stopped when he saw the expression on his wife's face. 20 years of marriage had taught him to recognize when Isabella was genuinely hurt, not just irritated. "Where were you really, Arthur?" she asked, crossing her arms. "John called here looking for you. He said you left the construction site this morning and didn't come back." Arthur's stomach clenched. He'd completely forgotten about work, something that never happened. "I had to take care of a personal matter." "Personal matter?" Isabella laughed without humor. "In 20 years of marriage, you've never had personal matters, only work and more work. What changed?" Rodrigo appeared at the kitchen door, guitar in hand, still wearing the dress shirt from the presentation. At 16, he had inherited his father's piercing eyes, but maintained the sensitivity that Arthur had lost decades ago. "Dad, you missed the presentation," the boy said, the disappointment clear in his voice. "I know, son. I'm sorry. I won't miss the next one." "That's what you said last time," Rodrigo muttered, leaving the kitchen. Luana appeared next, her 14 years carrying a precocious maturity that always surprised Arthur. "Mom, can I go to Amanda's tonight? She's rehearsing for the dance competition." "Of course, honey," Isabella replied, kissing the girl's forehead. "Just don't be too late." When they were alone again, Isabella faced Arthur with an expression that mixed hurt and curiosity. 20 years, Arthur. 20 years sleeping next to a man who never tells me anything about what he feels, what he thinks, what worries him. And today you disappear all day for a personal matter." Arthur sat down at the kitchen table, the weight of the day collapsing on his shoulders. He wanted to tell Isabella about Bartholomew, about Catherine, about the photo that had changed everything. But the words wouldn't come. How to explain something that he himself couldn't fully process? "It's about your father, isn't it?" Isabella said softly, sitting next to him. Arthur looked up, surprised. How did you—" "Today is the anniversary of losing him, October 17th. Every year you get strange on this date, but you never talk about it." She touched his hand. "Arthur, I know you suffered a lot when you were a child. I know that the loss of your father shaped who you became, but you can't keep carrying that pain alone." The irony of the situation hit Arthur like a punch. Isabella was offering exactly the support he needed, but he couldn't accept it because the truth was impossible to explain. How to tell his wife that the father she had comforted him about for 20 years wasn't really lost? "Sometimes I dream about him," Arthur said, choosing a partial truth. "Today was a difficult day." Isabella squeezed his hand. "I understand, but you have a family who loves you, Arthur." We have children who need their father present, not just physically. That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. He stayed in the office late, looking at the photo Catherine had given him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Bartholomew's confused face, heard his voice asking who he was. The pain of rejection, even involuntary, was almost unbearable. The next morning, Rodrigo found him in the office, still wearing the clothes from the day before. "Dad, did you sleep here?" Arthur looked up from the papers he was pretending to read. "I just dozed off a little. Had work to finish." Rodrigo sat in the armchair in front of the desk. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why do you hate music so much?" The question caught Arthur off guard. "I don't hate music, Rodrigo." "Yes, you do. Whenever I play the guitar, you find an excuse to leave. When Luana wants piano lessons, you change the subject. And yesterday, when you found out I was going to sing at the presentation, you rolled your eyes." Arthur felt a lump in his throat. The truth was that music reminded him of his father, of the afternoons when Bartholomew played the piano while he sat beside him, trying to follow along with his small, clumsy fingers. "Music brings back difficult memories," he said finally. "Of Grandpa Bartholomew?" Arthur nodded, surprised that his son remembered the grandfather he had never met. "Mom told me he played the piano. She said you look a lot like him." Rodrigo hesitated. "Dad, I know you suffered a lot when you were a child, but that doesn't mean that music has to be bad forever." At that moment, Arthur's cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Arthur? This is Dorothy." The woman's voice was tense. "Can you come here? It's about your father." Arthur's heart raced. "What happened?" He spent the whole night playing the piano and repeating your name. He didn't sleep at all. He's very agitated." Arthur looked at Rodrigo, who was watching him curiously. I can't go now." "Arthur, please, he's asking for Arthur. I don't know what else to do." "Dad, who is it?" Rodrigo asked. Arthur covered the phone. It's from work." "Arthur," Dorothy's voice continued on the line, "Catherine is also worried. She asked if you didn't like her, if that's why you didn't come back." Guilt washed over Arthur like a wave. He had promised the girl he would return, but the fear of facing his father's rejection again had paralyzed him. "I'll try to go later," he said, hanging up the phone. "Dad, is everything okay?" Rodrigo asked. "You seem different since yesterday." Arthur observed his son, so like him in appearance, but with a sensitivity that he had lost a long time ago. Rodrigo was the same age Arthur had been when he lost Bartholomew. The difference was that Rodrigo still had his father present, even if emotionally distant. "Rodrigo," he said impulsively, "what would you do if you found out that someone you thought you had lost forever was alive?" The boy frowned. "What do you mean?" "It's just a hypothetical question." Rodrigo thought for a moment. "I think I'd be happy, but also scared." "Scared of what?" "That this person had changed so much that they weren't the same as I remembered, or that they didn't want me back." His son's answer hit Arthur hard. That was exactly what he was feeling. Fear that Bartholomew would never recognize him. Fear that the 40 years of separation had created an insurmountable abyss between them. "But I think I'd still try," Rodrigo continued. "Because some people are worth fighting for, even when it's hard." At that moment, Isabella entered the office. "Arthur, I need to talk to you." Rodrigo stood up. "I'll let you talk." When they were alone, Isabella closed the door and leaned against it. "Last night you talked in your sleep." Arthur's blood ran cold. "What did I say?" "You kept repeating, 'Dad, it's me, Arthur,' several times. And then you started crying." She approached him. "Arthur, what's happening to you?" Arthur felt the walls closing in around him. The truth was trying to come out, but he couldn't find the right words. How to explain that his entire life had been built on a lie? That the man whose loss had shaped his personality was alive and didn't recognize him? "I need to tell you something," he said finally. "But you need to promise me that you'll listen to me until the end, no matter how impossible it sounds." Isabella sat down, her expression mixing concern and determination. "I'm listening." Arthur took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would change everything between them. "My father isn't lost, Isabella. He's alive." The silence that followed Arthur's words was deafening. Isabella stared at him with an expression that went from confusion to disbelief, then to the fear that her husband was having some kind of mental breakdown. "Arthur," she said carefully, "your father passed away 40 years ago. You were 12 years old. We visited his grave together several times." "I know how it sounds," Arthur replied, taking the photo out of his pocket. "But yesterday, a girl gave me this." Isabella took the photograph and examined it. Her eyes widened as she recognized Bartholomew. She had seen photos of him in Arthur's family albums. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. Arthur told her everything, about Catherine appearing at the construction site, about Dorothy, about finding Bartholomew alive but without his memory. Isabella listened in silence, her hands trembling as she held the photo. "Are you sure it's him?" she asked when Arthur finished. "I am. It's my father, Isabella." Older, confused, "But it's him." Isabella stood up and began to walk around the room. 40 years, Arthur. 40 years he's been alive, and you've never met. He lost his memory in the accident, and the woman who took care of him. She fell in love and decided not to look for his family. And now, what are you going to do? Before Arthur could answer, Rodrigo appeared at the door. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a little girl at the door asking for Dad." Arthur and Isabella exchanged glances. "Catherine," Arthur muttered. They went downstairs and found the girl on the porch, wearing a simple but clean dress, holding a small backpack. Her eyes were red from crying. "Hi, Arthur," she said in her small voice. "Grandma Dorothy is in the hospital." Arthur's heart raced. "What happened?" "She fainted this morning. The neighbor called the ambulance." Catherine wiped her nose with her sleeve. "There was no one else to take care of Grandpa Bartholomew, so I brought him with me." "Brought him?" Arthur looked at the street and saw a familiar figure sitting on the front yard bench. Bartholomew was there, observing the houses with a lost expression. "Catherine," Isabella said, kneeling in front of the girl, "how did you get here?" "I asked the bus driver to help. I knew the address because I heard when Grandma Dorothy called Arthur." Isabella looked at Arthur with a mixture of admiration and concern. A 4-year-old child had crossed the city alone, taking care of a man with memory problems because she trusted someone she had met only a day before. Rodrigo and Luana appeared on the porch, curious about the unusual visitor. When they saw Bartholomew in the garden, Rodrigo whispered, "Dad, who's that man?" Arthur took a deep breath. There was no more hiding. "That's Grandpa Bartholomew, my father." The impact of the revelation hit the children in different ways. Luana ran to the garden, fascinated by the presence of the grandfather she thought was lost. Rodrigo stood still, processing the impossibility of what he had just heard. "Hi, Grandpa," Luana said, sitting next to Bartholomew on the bench. "I'm Luana, your granddaughter." Bartholomew looked at her with genuine interest. "Luana, what a beautiful name. You have kind eyes, like someone I knew." "Arthur is my father," Luana continued. "He always talks about you." For a moment something shone in Bartholomew's eyes. "Arthur, my boy Arthur." He looked at the house and saw Arthur on the porch. "It's you, isn't it? You've grown up." Arthur descended the steps slowly, his heart pounding. "It's me, Dad. It's Arthur." "I remembered you this morning," Bartholomew said, his voice clearer than the day before. "You liked it when I played the piano. You always asked for the birdie song." Tears began to roll down Arthur's face. The birdie song was what he called a waltz that Bartholomew played when he was a child. "You remember?" Arthur asked, approaching slowly. "Not everything, but I remember that you were my most precious treasure." Bartholomew extended his trembling hand. "I'm sorry for not recognizing you yesterday. Sometimes the memories get all jumbled up." Arthur held his father's hand, feeling the same familiar roughness from decades of manual labor. "You don't need to apologize, Dad. The important thing is that we're together now." Rodrigo approached hesitantly. "Grandpa, I play the guitar. Would you like to teach me something on the piano?" Bartholomew's eyes lit up. "You like music? How wonderful. Music heals the heart, my grandson." Isabella watched the scene with tears in her eyes. In a few minutes, her family had expanded in an impossible way, but it had also become more complete in a way she didn't know was necessary. "Catherine," she said, kneeling again beside the girl, "do you want to call the hospital and find out how Dorothy is doing?" Catherine nodded but hesitated. "If Grandma doesn't get better, will you take care of me and Grandpa Bartholomew?" The question hit all the adults present. Arthur looked at Isabella, expecting to see hesitation or fear in her eyes. Instead, he saw determination. "Of course we will, honey," Isabella said. "Family takes care of family." In the weeks that followed, Arthur's house was completely transformed. Bartholomew stayed in the guest room, which Rodrigo and Luana helped adapt to his needs. A piano was installed in the living room, where Bartholomew spent hours playing songs that brought his memories back little by little. Catherine quickly adapted to the family routine. Isabella enrolled her in the nearby school, and the girl blossomed under the care of a structured family. What surprised everyone most was her emotional maturity. She seemed to instinctively understand what each person needed. Dorothy recovered after 2 weeks in the hospital, but the doctors recommended that she no longer live alone. Arthur, in a decision that surprised even himself, offered her to move into the house next door, which was for sale. He would buy it so that she could continue taking care of Bartholomew, but now as part of a larger family. The most impressive revelation came 3 months later. Catherine was helping Rodrigo with a song on the piano when Bartholomew interrupted her. "Catherine, can I tell you a secret?" he said, his voice filled with a lucidity that had become more frequent. "Of course, Grandpa. I always knew who Arthur was, from the first day he appeared at Dorothy's house." The silence that followed was total. Arthur, who was in the kitchen, stopped moving. "What do you mean, Grandpa?" Catherine asked. "I remembered him, but I was very afraid." Bartholomew looked at his own hands. 40 years, Catherine, 40 years without looking for my son. How to explain that? How to ask forgiveness for so much time lost? Arthur entered the room, his heart pounding. "Dad, I pretended not to remember because I was ashamed," Bartholomew continued. "Ashamed of having accepted starting a new life when I should have fought to come back to you." "But Grandpa," Catherine said with her childish wisdom, "you were hurt, and sometimes people need to heal before they can help others. People." Bartholomew smiled through his tears. "You're very wise for such a little girl." "Grandma Dorothy taught me that families find each other when they're ready to find each other," Catherine said. "And I knew you were ready because I saw how sad Arthur got when he saw your picture." Arthur knelt beside Catherine. "You planned all this, didn't you?" Catherine nodded, a shy smile on her face. "Grandma Dorothy was afraid to look for you, and Grandpa Bartholomew was afraid you wouldn't want him back. So I thought that if you met, you would realize that you loved each other even with all this time." Isabella, who had observed the entire conversation from the door, approached and hugged Catherine. "You brought our family back, little one." "I just wanted a family," Catherine said simply. "And now we all have one." That night, Bartholomew played the piano for the whole family gathered in the living room. Rodrigo accompanied on the guitar, Luana sang, and even Arthur dared to touch a few notes on the melody he had learned 40 years before. When the children went to sleep, Arthur and Bartholomew were alone at the piano. "Dad," Arthur said, "I spent 40 years angry. I built an entire life trying to prove that I was strong enough not to need anyone." "And I spent 40 years afraid," Bartholomew replied. "Afraid of not being good enough to be your father after so much time lost. But now we're here," Arthur said, placing his hand on his father's shoulder. "Now we're here," Bartholomew confirmed. and we have a special girl to thank for it. 6 months later, Arthur had learned to balance work and family in a way he had never imagined possible. His company thrived, but now he was also present for family dinners, his children's school performances, and the musical afternoons in the living room. Bartholomew had recovered much of his memories, but more importantly, he had created new memories with the family he thought he had lost forever. Dorothy had officially become the grandmother Catherine had never had, and Catherine had become the daughter Arthur and Isabella didn't know they needed. The greatest transformation had happened in Arthur. The man who once swore he would never need anyone again had learned that true strength came precisely from allowing people to enter his life and transform it. And it had all started with a 4-year-old child who believed that some families are worth fighting to unite, even when all the adults around them had given up trying. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.